Hello and welcome to Coffee House Shots, the Spectator's daily politics podcast. I'm Cindy Yu, the Spectator's assistant editor, and I'm joined today by Katy Balls and Michael Gove. Now, the long march to a new Conservative Party leader has finally come to an end, and it is Kemi Badenoch who has won earlier today. Now, Katy, she was the favourite at the beginning, and she has now won, so we've come all the way around, would you say?
Yes, and I think even before the contest was officially called, back when everyone was saying Rishi Sunak is not going to last very long, either pre or after an election, it was always seen as Kemi Badenoch to lose. She was the person who was talked about as the most likely to get through. Back when you had the so-called plotters under Rishi Sunak, there'd all be all these stories about how they wanted Kemi Badenoch to be the candidate, and she was refusing to get on board with them, which I think was one of the several problems the plot had. And then when the contest was called, I think there was a sense that she was the front runner. But yet there have been various points in the contest, which has been spanning for several months, in which it has seen that as though, yes, it's hers to lose, but she could lose it. And that was, I think, one of the big challenges was getting to the final two. In a way, you can 100% see a scenario where just a few small things going differently, she wouldn't have been in the final two. The fact that James Cleverly, who was in the front in the parliamentary round before the final parliamentary round, was surprised to be knocked out. You know, if a few people hadn't played with their votes, what would the result have been? And then I think there was definitely, over the past week, which was partly, I think, Kemi Badenoch's camp being a bit superstitious, they were getting quite worried that perhaps the lower turnout and the turnout was about 10% less than it was in the 2022 Tory leadership contest, might mean that all these polls suggesting Kemi Badenoch was quite a comfortable favourite would be proven wrong. And definitely some worry this week with the Jenrick camp saying it's going to be much closer than you expect. And Kemi Badenoch, who's not exactly known for her deep love of the mainstream media, embarking on a whistle-stop, press tour, doing many podcasts and interviews all over the place. And in Kemi Badenoch's true style, saying, sort of, why are you doing all these things? She said, well, I'm worried that it's low turnout, people aren't going out to
Honesty.
vote. So, yes, honesty. So it is the result. I think if you'd asked us to predict at the beginning of the contest who would win, it would be Kemi Badenoch. But there's been enough bumps that I think her camp will be quite relieved today.
And Michael, just breaking down the results themselves, there was 73% turnout. Kemi got 12,000 votes more than Robert Jenrick did. Does that result vindicate the efforts in the last week to kind of get the vote out?
I think it probably does. I think Katy is absolutely right that Kemi did it on her terms. There are three historical factors here to note. The first and the most striking is the fourth woman elected to lead the Conservative Party, and of course the first woman of colour. The second is, as Kate quite rightly points out, it's always been the case that the early front-runner, the early favourite in the Conservative Party leadership election, normally falters. So David Davis, Rishi Sunak, the people who were originally presumed to be the front-runners, don't make it through. Kemi did, albeit with bumps along the way. The third thing is that it's generally the case that people who've run in a Conservative leadership election, when they present themselves again in a leadership election, don't win. Michael Howard took part in the leadership election, but then got the crown by acclamation. I think this is the first time that someone has tried, failed, and then succeeded. And all of those historic firsts are underpinned by the fact that Kemi fought the campaign in a way that defied certain expectations. So Robert Jenrick, to his credit, was admirably specific about the policy prescriptions that he believed were necessary for the Conservative Party to win. It's clear that 40% of the membership thought that was the right thing to do. Kemi deliberately said, no, I am not going to get into that detail now. I'm not going to be trapped by that. The media, commentators, some of her own party resisted that. But the fact she's won on those terms gives her a degree of flexibility about how she takes things forward.
And one of the things that is the same as before, though, is that a woman has now won at the membership stage. What does that say about the Conservative Party, Katy?
Well, you are seeing, I think it's interesting that Keir Starmer and some of the Labour politicians coming out to do the obligatory congratulations, saying how fantastic to have a black woman elected and so forth. And inevitably, if people are saying, and some begrudging in the Labour Party, saying you have to give credit to the Conservative Party on this, in the sense that they have routinely picked women, the membership picks women, and also the MPs backing that, whereas you look at Labour and their failure to do that, and it clearly is a sore point, which is why they are so keen to talk up Rachel Reeves as the first female chancellor. But I think inevitably it is reopening that debate on the Labour side as to why is it that they talk so much a good game on this but have failed to do so themselves.
We remember just a few weeks ago when Sue Gray, who was Keir Starmer's chief of staff, left. One of the things that was said then is that the Labour leadership's team was a bit of a boys' club. And if one thinks about the fractious relationships that Keir Starmer has had with people within his party, Angela Rayner, Louise Haigh, not making Emily Thornberry the Attorney General when she was the shadow, there is a sense, there could be a sense that's constructed, that it's Keir who has trouble with women. Kemi, however, will want her sex to be the least important thing about her candidacy. As is well known, she dislikes identity politics, and she will want to run and she will want to win on the basis of ideas. The challenge, however, is that the intellectual case that she will want to make will immediately come up against a series of policy decisions that will be forced on the Conservatives in response to what Rachel Reeves has done in the budget.
Well, Michael, could you flesh out some of those policy areas? And as you say, she's been quite vague so far, but people seem to know what she stands for. She's just very, honest, forthright speaking, which she would bill herself as. So what are the issues that she's going to be looking at?
Well, the budget, and again, as Katie and others have remarked, it hasn't gone well for Labour so far. However, it poses strategic challenges for the Conservatives. So the first and most central one is the National Health Service. Do you agree with this investment? And Robert Jenrick, when he was being interviewed just a couple of days ago, challenged on that, said we need reform in the NHS. Few people take exception to that position. But is it reform plus funding? And if you don't support this injection of additional cash into the NHS, what is your answer? Now, if you're in opposition 4 years out from an election, you don't have to be drawn on every detail, but there is a big question about whether or not you support that level of investment. And then again, on the economics, if you're going to say that Labour are taking a path which is bad for growth, where GDP growth will be anemic, the challenge is, what would you do differently? And that may draw you into economic arguments that allow people to caricature the Conservative position as a throwback to the past, as truss redux, rather than original and groundbreaking.
Right, because that's the other thing about this moment now. It can be seen as a reset or a renewal for the Conservative Party itself, which has been embroiled in psychodramas possibly since Brexit, really. Rishi Sunak is now on his way out, so how can Kemi rebuild the party?
So she has a gift today, in the sense she has taken over the party on the day at least one poll, puts the Conservatives ahead of Labour.
By how much, Katie?
By about 1 point. But given the Conservatives have been behind Labour for such a long time, I think probably since Partygate, on the peak of it, that is obviously a substantial moment. And I think all the team Rishi Sunak are very keen to say this is the Sunak legacy. Think less about that election. Think more about the poll the day he, as he transfers power. But I think because of Labour's misfortunes, if we're being honest, and I think the current polling is too early to say what effect the budget is having on the polling. But various decisions Labour have made, their tricky first 100 days, is leading to a point where the Tories, at least from where they sit on public opinion, is not as dire as you probably would expect it to be if you thought about it the day after the election result. There is still so much to do, though. And, Kemi Badenoch is going to be dealing with a huge funding gap. There's very little money. CCHQ is depleted of resources and staff. And also, I think, just getting used to what it's like to be in opposition, because Kemi Badenoch does not know what it is like to be in opposition in terms of having anything, well, the past couple of months, sure, but she doesn't have any experience because she entered government, so she entered Parliament when the party was in power. Yes, in a pretty small intake, because it was a 2017 intake, who she's very close to now. But as she moves into the Norman Shaw South Building, Lotto, the leaders of the opposition office, I think one of the big challenges is going to be generating attention when you want it. Probably she is the candidate of all the lot who is the best place to get attention, as she likes to say, whether it is good or bad. People do seem to pay attention to what she says, but it's still going to be a hard slog in that sense. And then, of course, there's the question of, you talk about psychodrama, unity. And I think what was striking in Kemi Badenoch's speech today, in a way, this is common sense and logical, but just because she is known to be combative sometimes, it was striking that she took so much time really praising Rishi Sunak for all the great work he's done. Slightly different tone than when she spoke at Shadow Cabinet a few months ago, suggesting Rishi Sunak had made awful mistakes in the election. Of course, both can be true. And then moving on to really praise Robert Jenrick, the runner-up. And I think particularly in the final part of this leadership contest, it's got pretty rough between Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch and their teams. There's been, I think, more blue on blue, even if there haven't been any technical yellow cards to show for it. And she said Robert Jenrick is going to have a big role to play in the Conservative Party for many years to come, which does, I think, imply that there'll be a shadow cabinet role for him. But we will need to see how senior that is going to be, because you couldn't really put him, I don't think, in, for example, shadow home, unless you're willing to take his ECHR policy. Or I suspect he would struggle with that. So what kind of role will she offer, and will Robert Jenrick take it? I think that's one step for the unity part. If Robert Jenrick is on the backbenchers, and we know that James Cleverly has given an interview suggesting he wants to stay on the backbenchers, trying to build a shadow cabinet, and we don't expect her to do this till next week. Kemi Badenoch respects weekends. Trying to build one which brings in, I think, various parts of the quite small party, but particularly that Jenrick group is going to be quite important, because if you look at the MP backers in this contest, not one of the candidates received more than about a third of the parliamentary party in support. And the last time I think that happened was 2001, which wasn't the most promising comparison if you're looking to make it all the way to the election.
I think Katie is absolutely right that you only have 121 Conservative MPs. You will see a big generational shift. So Rishi Sunak stepping down, obviously, as leader, Oliver Dowden stepping down from the Shadow Cabinet, Jeremy Hunt as Shadow Chancellor going, and I think probably Andrew Mitchell as Shadow Foreign Secretary going, and Steve Barclay, who's been a fixture, a very talented fixture of successive Conservative cabinets, also stepping down. So we will see less recognised faces. I expect that there'll be big roles for some of the people who've been with Kemi throughout some of that 2017 intake, people like Julia Lopez and Andrew Bowie, and also people like Andrew Griffith and Chris Philp, who played a critical role in her campaign. One person who deserves praise anyway is the person who was the manager of Kemi's campaign this time round, the manager of her campaign when she first ran in 2022, Lee Rowley. He lost his seat in North East Derbyshire at the last election, but I suspect very strongly that he will be the Chief of Staff, and he is one of the intellectually most rigorous people within the Conservative Party, economically dry, but also very, very thoughtful. And I think that he and the team that he assembles will be critical to making sure that the shrunken ranks of the Parliamentary Conservative Party can work effectively.
And finally, what do you both see as the challenge for Kemi going ahead? I mean, she has built herself very much on honesty. Is that honesty a good thing? Could it get her a lot of attention? Or could it actually be bad, for example, when it comes to, let's say, unity?
So it depends who she is picking a fight with. It's obviously great to have a fighter when you put them in the right direction. And then they're really going after Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage in this instance. And I think that, one thing that's quite interesting is what is the Labour perspective on Kemi Badenoch? And lots in Labour, they like to say they're not particularly worried about Kemi Badenoch, but there are definitely some in number 10 who think that she could pose a problem to Keir Starmer. At the very least, a problem in terms of Wednesday lunchtimes. We'll have the first Prime Minister's questions next week with the the old Prime Minister in some ways compared to Kemi Badenoch, but it's a new dynamic. And I think that is something that he's going to have to get used to. Often also, to go back to the women point, I think male leaders can struggle a bit more when they're going up against a female adversary and they don't know whether to be, can they be blokey? Do they have to be gallant? And all these things which go through their minds and can make it a bit harder for them in working out how to go on the attack in the right way. And so I think that Labour will be nervous about Kemi Badenoch. They will hope to depict her as weird. A few people said that to me. They want to say, she has all these weird positions and she's obsessed with culture wars. I think they'll try and do that. But I think there are some ways in which they think it's going to be hard for them. But that's why, in some ways, Kemi Badenoch being direct, combative in some ways, is one of her biggest strengths. And if she can also use that against Nigel Farage. I think that will come as a relief to her party. I think one of her problems is going to be, can she focus on that? And then in doing so, have a situation where when she's leading the parliamentary party, she is listening to enough people. She is giving time, because some of the leader roles are just, a part of the job is simply making people feel like they're heard. And I think that there are some MPs in the party who took almost anyone but Kemi approach, just because they felt in the past that she had not been that respectful of their opinions or time, which might not seem like it is the most important part of being a leader. And if we were going to list the qualities, I don't think we'd put them in the top 3 things that a leader must be able to do first and foremost. But in order to have a smooth running operation, you're going to need some things like that. And then I think the relationship with the media is going to be quite interesting, because is it going to be the case that Kemi Badenoch's Twitter feed becomes just, a rapid rebuttal unit to various media appearances that she does? Or are they going to have a bit of approach where they take some of the things people like, which is a sense of authenticity and saying things how they are, which often people in focus groups will say, that's why you like Nigel Farage, that's why we don't like these cardboard cutout politicians, but also finding a way to keep that while I think having a smoother relationship with parts of the media than she has had previously. Because if you're leader of the opposition and you have 121 MPs in total, you do have to work with the media to get the message you want out there.
There is a greater potential for Kemi to command attention in the media and elsewhere than almost any other Conservative. Luke Trill, who runs a group called More in Common, has been running focus groups throughout the leadership election, and he said that Kemi was the candidate most capable of making people look at the Conservative Party afresh. So that is an opportunity. But the first 100 days of any leader is a cliche. During those 100 days, exactly as Katy says, Labour will be setting out to lay some traps, whether that's on some of the things that Kemi has said in the past, which have been interpreted in a particular way, for example, on maternity pay. And there will need to be, combined with candour, a certain amount of caution, car canny, as we say in Scotland. 2 other things, I would say. The first is that, as Katy quite rightly pointed out, Rishi Sunak bequeathed to his party a poll lead. Only 1 point, but a poll lead. And when he became leader, they were 20 points behind. But that polling landscape is fractured. The Conservatives are just on 29, Labour on 28, Reform just nudging 20, and the Liberal Democrats and the Greens between them over 20. So you have sort of 4 blocks here, 2 centre-right and centre-left around 30, and then 2 more to the right and more to the left on around 20. So one of the challenges for Kemi is to deal not just with disaffection with the Conservative Party, but disaffection with standard politics, the standard political debate and structure that creates an opportunity for her. And then the final thing will be the choices that she makes in the next few days. So, of course, Labour will try to lay traps, but she has an opportunity, depending upon where she's seen, the issues she raises, the people whom she puts forward, to define herself afresh. And I think that the team that she's built up, I mentioned people like Lee Rowley and Alex Burghardt, have been giving a lot of thought to that. So we will see in the next week, even as America chooses its next president, how effective the new Badenoch operation will be.
Michael and Katy, thank you very much.